We had another batch of Twitter files drop, which exposed some really troubling things, especially since we know the Democrats are the pro-democracy party, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's really
right in the name.
That,
it's in the name.
Right. It's very troubling that the pro-democracy party would engage in the kinds of tactics exposed in the latest Twitter files Matt Taibbi drop here. So let's take a look at this, folks, here. These are 40 exhibits. I know that sounds daunting. It's not going to take that long because most of the sort of accompanying images he actually quotes in the tweets themselves here. So thread, Twitter files, number 15, move over Jason Blair. Twitter files expose the next great media fraud. I think we need to just call this out on the bullshit it is. Quote, falsely accuses a bunch of legitimate right-leaning accounts of being Russian bots. Quote, virtually any conclusion drawn from it will take conversations in conservative circles on Twitter and accuse them of being Russians. These quotes by Twitter executives about Hamilton 68, a digital dashboard that claimed to track Russian influence and was the source of hundreds, if not thousands, of mainstream print and TV news stories in the Trump years. The Alliance for Securing Democracy, Hamilton 68, a new tool to track Russian disinformation on Twitter. So, yes, Matt Taibbi tried to set this up like a movie trailer. These quotes were responses to the fact that this Hamilton 68 project was nothing like what it claimed to be. Russell, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, they in their advertising, Hamilton 68 went full constructivist Russian art referencing the Soviet era, like full-on McCarthyism.
Oh, yeah. And just absolute, total bullshit.
Yep.
As you could see.
Yep.
Here, I think we just need to call this out on the bullshit it is.
Now understand, I don't know if this is clear to people. This is what Yoel Roth, who early on in the Twitter files kind of emerged as this villain. And I think as the Twitter files have continued to drop, he's a more sympathetic figure than he had first appeared. Because here, he's really ordering investigations of what this company is basing their assertions that all of these people are Russian disinformation agents or bots or adjacent. And Hamilton 68 would not release this list, saying, well, if we release it, the Russians will just shut down these accounts. So they based on the searches they did, reverse engineered it. So that's what this conversation is about, because once they looked at who's on the list, they were like, this is total bullshit.
Exactly. The dashboard was headed by former FBI counterintelligence official and current MSNBC contributor Clint Watts and funded by a neoliberal think tank, the Alliance for Securing Democracy. Now, look at this rogues gallery here. The ASD Advisory Council includes neoconservative writer Bill Kristol, former ambassador to Russia Michael McFaul, one of the most hawkish blue and yellow, Ukraine flag Twitter handles there is out there, ex-Hillary for America chief John Podesta, and former heads or deputy heads of the CIA, NSA, and the Department of Homeland Security. Mike Chertoff, it's a name you might know, Bill Kristol there, Mike McFaul, Mike Morrell, John Podesta himself. News outlets for years cited Watts and Hamilton 68 when claiming Russian bots were, quote, amplifying an endless parade of social media causes against strikes in Syria, in support of Fox host Laura Ingraham, the campaigns of both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, which is what we said earlier, that this is going to expose, and that this is not the only example of this, pardon me, but these sort of smears, as we all know, were weaponized against both the left and the right. Here we go. The Russian bots are coming. This bipartisan duo is on it. The bipartisan duo, meaning, obviously, some of the folks at the ASD, the Alliance for Securing Democracy. All these titles are just so Orwellian, which we knew already, sort of vaguely, how sort of just like 1984 they were, but now that you get the context, it really takes it to a whole new level, right? Hamilton 68 was the source for stories claiming Russian bots push terms like deep state. Oh, Russian bots. Like Russell and I.
Because there is no
like
deep state.
Or
no, of course
hashtag
not. Coincidentally, every single thing that the establishment was against turned out to be Russian disinformation.
From whether they be interested or not, fire McMaster, Schumer shut down, walk away. That was the walk away from the Democratic Party movement. Released the memo. Alabama Senate race. That was the Roy Moore, Doug Jones race.
Yeah,
now, I understand you think the Russians are under every corner. You really think Vladimir Putin gives a shit about fucking Doug Jones versus Roy Moore?
I hear that Roy Moore liked them young.
He liked them young. He liked them young. Who is this? Doug Jones.
We must put pedophile in Congress.
Right, yeah. Parkland shooting.
We already have one as president.
Right, exactly. We're so close. The secret ingredient to Hamilton's 68th analytical method, a list. All right, here's where it gets crazy. Our analysis has linked 600 Twitter accounts to Russian influence activities online, was how the site put it at launch. 600 Twitter accounts to Russian influence activities. We've linked 600 accounts to Russian influence activities. As Russell mentioned before, Hamilton 68 never released the list, claiming the Russians will simply shut the accounts down. All those reporters and TV personalities making claims about Russian bots never really knew what they were describing. I do want to read this here. For what it's worth, Rosenberger and Fly disclose their methodology on their website and say they can't reveal the list of the 600 accounts they are following or the Russians will shut them down. Other researchers with whom I've spoken say the tweets and messages found by Hamilton 68 certainly are consistent with what they've seen from Russian-linked handles. Rosenberger, who spent years in the Obama White House and State Department, laughs at the idea she's a neocon plant, though it is true that their advisory board contains both liberal Russia experts, like former Obama ambassador to Moscow, Mike McFaul, as well as a favorite Greenwald bête noire, the original neocon, Bill Kristol.
Okay, so that, I'm glad you read that, because when I was reading it, it stood out to me, because that is so much the language of that kind of insidery, smug, mocking corporate media. That's not just a paragraph, that's a signal about who you're allowed to take seriously and who you're allowed to dismiss. It's Glenn Greenwald, bête noire, the original neocon Bill Kristol. That is telling their brain dead readers Glenn Greenwald is out of bounds. Anything he says is cuckoo crazy pants.
Exactly.
And Bill Kristol is okay. He's okay because Glenn Greenwald says he's not.
Twitter executives were in a unique position to recreate Hamilton's list, reverse engineering it from the site's requests for Twitter data. Concerned about the deluge of Hamilton-based news stories, they did so, and what they found shocked them. These accounts, they concluded, are neither strongly Russian nor strongly bots. No evidence to support the statement that the dashboard is a finger on the pulse of Russian information ops. The dashboard is a blacklist for people they don't like. Quote, hardly illuminating a massive influence operation. In layman's terms, the Hamilton 68 barely had any Russians. In fact, apart from a few RT accounts, it's mostly full of ordinary Americans, Canadians, and Brits. It was a scam. Instead of tracking how, quote-unquote, Russia influenced American attitudes, Hamilton 68 simply collected a handful of mostly real, mostly American accounts and described their organic conversations as Russian scheming. I have no doubt that most of you who are watching this, if you have been engaging on social media for the past 5 or 6 years and your politics are remotely similar to ours, you yourself have been accused by one of these morons of having worked with Russians. Way back in the early days of this show, before we were even on YouTube, we were just an audio podcast. I got an email. I should have produced this as an exhibit. I should have produced, come to think of it, God damn it. I should have actually listed this. I should have pulled the graphic. It's years back. It would have taken me a while to find. We got an email saying, "Hi, my friends are concerned that this site," because we posted sort of like mini op-ed blog type things also, that this site, both the podcast and our writings, is being run by Russians. Can you prove to me, you provide me proof that you are an American citizen?
It's for us to prove that we're not guilty.
A lunatic
we're not
actually sent
innocent.
me that email because she read a blog that she didn't agree with. She said, my friends flagged this as potential Russian material. Can you prove to me? I owe it to prove to her that I am an American citizen. I wrote her back. I said, actually, thanks to lunatics like you, Facebook actually makes us prove, because that's where we did all of our work in the early days. We weren't on YouTube yet. Facebook actually sends a letter to your house when you open up a news and politics-oriented Facebook page. They send a letter to your house with a PIN number that you then have to log on to Facebook and enter in before they will let you advertise your stuff, because they want to make sure you live where you say you live and not in Moscow. And so I said, yes, we actually undergo that thanks to you fucking sickos who send us emails asking for proof of citizenship because we said something you don't like. True story.
And we used to get that a lot on Facebook during the height of this. We would get these people going, this is clearly a Russian disinformation site, bot farm. Like, we would get all these comments on Facebook from these morons.
Yeah.
If you're like me, and I think this is true of most people on the left, you probably started out a more, a doctrinaire Democrat. I certainly did. And you probably still know a lot of people who are these people. So if you want to know why so many people that you're friends with have gone completely batshit crazy as any Fox News addict, but just addicted to a different product, this is why. This is what they've been imbibing for years and years, this kind of media.
Number 16, Twitter immediately recognized these Hamilton-driven news stories posed a major ethical problem, potentially implicating them. Real people need to know they've been unilaterally labeled Russian stooges without evidence or recourse. Look at Yoel Roth.
This is why I'm saying, Yoel, he's growing on me. He's growing on me. He had his moments.
Little Cary Grant vibes here coming from Yoel Roth. Some Twitter execs barely wanted to out Hamilton 68. After Russians were blamed for hyping the Parkland shooting hashtag, one wrote, "Why can't we say we've investigated and citing Hamilton 68 is being wrong, irresponsible, and biased? Why can't we just say that we've investigated these accounts and that these people genuinely have these viewpoints? And citing Hamilton 68 as being wrong, irresponsible, and biased." Yes, some people genuinely have viewpoints that you don't want them to have. That does not make them Russians. That actually makes them Americans in the most traditional and old-fashioned sense. Does it not?
In theory, but they did a poll a few years ago that was really interesting that scared the crap out of Democrats. It showed that centrists, people who consider themselves centrists, believe in democracy less than people that identify as right wing.
Of course.
And yes, we say of course because we debate these.
You wrote a whole article on that back in
idiots all the time.
If you remember.
Yeah. Because if you talk to them, their basic premise ever since Donald Trump got elected is that the people can't be trusted. So clearly, by definition, you don't believe in democracy. And their whole project of kicking people off social media and kicking people off electronic platforms, deplatforming people, is the belief that the deplorables can't be trusted with information. That it's not that the people hate us. I heard this from people. You hear this all the time from Democrats after Hillary lost to Trump. the Democrats don't know messaging. They don't understand messaging.
Right.
It never occurs to them that the Democrats are repulsive, that it's not that people don't get the message. It's that they don't like the message.
Exactly.
That never occurs to them.
Yeah, exactly right. Yoel Roth wanted a confrontation. My recommendation at this stage is an ultimatum. You release the list or we do, he wrote. However, there were internal concerns about taking on the politically connected Alliance for Securing Democracy. Was the Alliance for Securing Democracy intimidating a social media company into exposing that they were not as democratic as they claimed? That would seem to go against the name of the outfit. Again, the Orwellian Alliance for Securing Democracy.
Are you telling me that the name of an organization doesn't necessarily mean that that's what it stands for?
Right, exactly.
Mind blown.
Mind blown. We have to be careful in how much we push back on ASD publicly, said future White House and NSC spokesperson Emily Horn. I also have been very frustrated in not calling out Hamilton 68 more publicly, but understand we have to play a longer game here, wrote Carlos Monje, the future senior advisor to Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg.
And
see how connected all these people are?
Well, and that's it. And that's why they wouldn't call it out, because they wanted to have, they knew they might want jobs in government later on. So, hey, if we make waves with these people, we might not get those jobs. And look, now they got those jobs.
Look, I've said this in the past on a past Twitter Files segment. There's a word that describes this very well. It starts with an F and it ends with ashism. This is fascism. This alliance of the corporate state and the state is fascism. This is absolutely what fascism is. I hate to rain on Crystal Ball's parade, because I know she thinks that the far right are the real threat to democracy. This is a grotesque undermining of the democratic process. To use these smears without any evidence or due process to control the debate, because for the 600 Twitter handles who were accused of being Russian bots, there were tens of thousands who were afraid that they would be accused of being Russian bots if they said what was on their mind. So this is how you shape discourse and shape narrative. It's not just about the people you nail. It's about the much larger circle around them of people who are afraid you're going to come for them. And they censor themselves. So the legitimate people, as one Twitter exec called them, never found out they'd been used as fodder for mountains of news stories about Russian influence. Because the Twitter files contain the list, they've begun finding out. I like this part. I'm shocked, says Sonia Mansour, who as a child lived through civil war in Lebanon. Supposedly in a free world, we are being watched at many levels by what we say online. I've written a book about the U.S. Constitution, says Chicago-based lawyer Dave Shestokas. I hope I got his name right. How I made a list like this is incredible to me. There's his profile there. Looks like a Russian to me.
Yeah.
Very suspicious.
Those Russians, they like to use children to
exactly.
distract
Sneaky,
from what they're really doing. Yeah.
When I was growing up, my father told me about the McCarthyite blacklist, says Oregon native Jacob Levitch. As a child, it would never have occurred to me that this would come back in force and broadly in a way designed to undermine the rights we hold dear. Even Twitter execs were stunned to read who was on the list, wrote policy chief Nick Pickles about British comic Holborn Lawls. I don't know who that is. A wind-up merchant. Here he is. Old Holborn. A wind-up merchant. I follow him and wouldn't say he's pro-Russian. I can't even remember him tweeting about Russia. I'm listed as a foreign bot, said conservative media figure Dennis Michael Lynch. As a proud tax-paying citizen, charitable family man, and honest son of a U.S. Marine, I deserve better. We all do. He does. He does deserve better. I don't know if he deserves much better, but he deserves better.
It deserves marginally better.
Yeah, he deserves marginally better. Consortium editor Joe Loria was angered to find he was on the list, which targeted voices across the spectrum. Okay, now George Loria, here's a guy right? Organizations like Hamilton 68 are in business to enforce an official narrative, which means excising inconvenient facts, which they call misinformation. Bingo.
Yep,
Consortium
that's
News,
it.
that's a left outlet.
Yep.
That guy knows what's up. What makes this an important story is the sheer scale of the news footprint left by Hamilton 68's digital McCarthyism, which everyone has experienced. They say if you lived in New York City in the 80s and the 90s, you had a run-in with the mafia, whether you knew it or not. And the same is true here, right? You encountered their footprint, whether you know it or not. The quantity of headlines and TV segments dwarfs the impact of individual fabulists like Jason Blair or Stephen Glass. If we look, he put together a few little montages here.
And in Taibbi's Substack
Collages,
article, he gets into this even more. Like Mother Jones alone had 17 of these articles.
Oh, yeah. Well, he mentions Mother Jones at the end. I mean, they're the absolute worst. You know, I mean...
CNN, ABC, all of them.
Absolutely. Hamilton 68 was used as a source to assert Russian influence in an astonishing array of news stories. Support for Brett Kavanaugh or the Devin Nunes memo, the Parkland shooting, manipulation of black voters, attacks on the Mueller investigation. Remember there was that headline that suggested black voters were dissuaded?
I remember that very well. I knew a lot of shit libs who were spreading that around.
Yeah. Yeah. The Russians tricked the black people into staying home in November.
Yeah, because
real,
the Democrats are really
profound respects
the
for
Democrats are delivering
black people there, that they could be duped by Vladimir Putin. I had people tell me I was duped by Putin. Why don't you admit? I had friends tell me, why don't you admit you were played by Putin? And at a certain point, I would say, do you realize how sick you have to be to say that to me? Do you like at a certain point you can't even argue this? This is just like your politics come from having watched 3 Days of the Condor once. And that's it. You never looked up anything else. You never bothered to learn anything else about anything. You know, you watched that movie and then you read these headlines.
No, what I loved was when you would see these shit libs post things that were supposedly Russian disinformation, and then they proudly proclaim,
"I'm not falling for it.
I'm not falling for it. Nope. I spotted this immediately as Russian disinformation."
Yeah, exactly.
Jesus
exactly.
Christ. How fucking stupid are you, man?
These stories raised fears in the population, and most insidious of all were used to smear people like Tulsi Gabbard as foreign assets, which is something that they used right through the 2020 campaign, and drum up
I thought
sympathy.
we were supposed to respect veterans.
Yeah,
what happened to that? What happened to that? She's still serving, right? She's still in the armed forces.
Yeah. She goes back and forth all the time. She has to take a hiatus from her new podcast show to go serve.
Yeah, you would think, being a Russian asset, they wouldn't let her keep serving in the military as an officer.
Right,
you know?
right. Well, exactly.
They might have an issue with that. Yeah.
And drum up sympathy for political causes like Joe Biden's campaign by describing critics as Russian aligned. Tulsi was described as a Russian agent who's disrupting the Democratic Party by running in the primary. Incredibly and ironically, these stories were also frequently used as evidence of the spread of fake news on sites like Twitter. Here you see a Mother Jones headline as an example. It was a lie. The illusion of Russian support was created by tracking people like Joe Loria, Sonia Mansour, and Dave Shostakis. Virtually every major American news organization cited these fake tales, even fact-checking sites like Snopes and PolitiFact. Russia's social media efforts in 2016 were not just false, but inflammatory. Snopes, trolls, bots, useful idiots attack new committee aimed at exposing Russian propaganda campaigns. Number 33, Twitter didn't have the guts to out Hamilton 68 publicly, but did try to speak to reporters off the record. Reports are chafing, said Horn. It's like shouting into a void. Roth was offended by the idea that tweets on certain themes suggested subversion. Can we talk about how incredibly condescending this is? If you talk about these themes, you must have been duped by Russian propaganda. Well, yes, it is condescending.
And I'm going to say once again,
if you haven't noticed, condescension is sort of the Democrats' brand. That's their MO, is condescension. backed by nothing, backed up by absolutely zero substance at all. At all. That's why this was such an attractive go-to for them, right? How convenient for a bunch of know-nothing morons to not have to provide a counter-argument. They can just say what you said is Russian propaganda. Boom. That's it. That's it.
Today's Democratic Party is a new 21st century spin on the old rich white American aristocracy that always had disdain for poor whites. Only now, in the 21st century, they make pretenses of caring about diversity. You know,
right.
But that's it. It's the same thing. They found a new way to piss on the peasants while still maintaining the premise of moral superiority. They have moral superiority now because they're anti-racist. Meanwhile, look at the hires in their Senate and congressional staffs.
Right.
Look at that. Until fairly recently, I'm not sure if this is still true, the Republicans actually had more black people serving on their staffs than the Democrats did.
I wouldn't know that. I had not heard that.
Until fairly recently. It might have changed now because it got a lot of reporting.
Right.
But yeah, the Republicans actually had more people of color.
Again, even Roth, like most Twitter execs, an ardent Democratic partisan, saw that the Hamilton scheme would lead people, quote, to assert that any right-leaning content is propagated by Russian bots. Well, yes, of course. That was the point. And a lot of left-leaning content also. At least two other research institutions that use similar methodologies and were cited as sources in news stories were also criticized in Twitter email correspondence. MSNBC, Watts, The Washington Post, Politico, Mother Jones, which did at least 14 Hamilton 68 stories, the Alliance for Securing Democracy, and the offices of politicians like Dianne Feinstein all refused comment unless this counts.
I mean, is Feinstein still capable of commenting?
Well, yeah, I guess you can.
To be
fair, you can't fault him for that. But this is, I wanted to put this graphic up here because Matt Taibbi tweets, "Are you really going to no comment my upcoming story about Hamilton 68 and secure democracy?" This was right before he dropped this. "I have the list. Time to come clean. You can find information describing Hamilton 68's methodology published in 2017 and 2018 here." That's a common sort of automated type response that you see in the tech world quite often, and there's obviously a lot of crossover. It's the same mentality. It's the same crop of people. You have a question, you have a concern, you would like to talk to a person about it, and they say, hey, for more information on how we make our calls, click here. They just get rid of you. Just fuck you, no respect whatsoever. You're just a number. Leave us alone. This was an academic scandal as well as Harvard, Princeton, Temple, NYU, George Washington University, and other universities promoted Hamilton 68 as a source.
Okay, and I just want to make a point here about this. You know, there's a lot of controversy right now about the things that Ron DeSantis is doing in Florida in regards to education. If you don't know, he took a failing university there, a university that had something like a 20% graduation rate, and basically made it an experiment to completely revamp the curriculum with a kind of anti-woke board of directors and all of this. And you have all of these people up in arms arguing. This is now you can be up in arms about that, but they're predicating their argument on the idea that it is a travesty for Ron DeSantis to suggest that universities and educators should not be free to make their own decisions in this regard, and that you're imposing on their freedom by doing this, as if they are neutral arbiters who are making sound decisions and nonpartisan and non-politically driven decisions about how to run their universities. And because of the bubble they live in, what the liberals don't understand is the reason Ron DeSantis has as much support to do things like this as he does is this. This is why. Look at what we're talking about. We're talking about the cream of the crop, supposedly. Right. This is Harvard. This is Temple. This is Princeton. These are supposed to be the smartest people in the university system. They couldn't figure out that this really didn't have anything behind it. They went along with, let's face it, this was the popular view for establishment liberals, and they just went along with it. They didn't apply any academic standards. If they were really doing their jobs, we should have heard from like MIT. We've statistically analyzed this, and this doesn't seem very likely, right? That would give people faith that the university system is what it's supposed to be. A place of learning, a place of research, a place of knowledge. The reason DeSantis is getting this much traction is he's addressing a real problem with our education. Now, you might not agree with his solution, but denying that the problem exists is empowering that movement.
Absolutely. 100%. Just got to take the super chat. Story, it didn't gel. I appreciate on the left. I appreciate those on the left recognizing and speaking up. I don't want anyone on either side to experience this un-American treatment. A lot of rationalized civil rights violations. Well, yes. I mean, this gets to a major point. And the major point here, and, there's a lot of talk about horseshoe theory, right? About how the far left and the far right are closer together than the centrists. And in certain cases, on certain issues, that's true, like probably the war in Ukraine. That's probably very true. On certain issues, it's not as true. But one thing, just broadly speaking, that I think the left and the right, sort of the far left and the far right, have in common that the centrists don't, is that they have deeply held beliefs and ideas, and they are confident enough in those ideas that they do not wish to censor those who disagree with them, because they actually have confidence that they can win a debate based on the strength of their ideas, whereas the centrists do not have any confidence in their ideas because they have no ideas. They only have interests. If you are a centrist, you do not have opinions. You have interests. You have an interest in maintaining the system as it is. That is not undergirded by any sincere political sentiment. And so that's why you want to shut everybody else up, because you have no arguments. And you have no arguments. You only have incentives. And that incentive is to maintain the system as it is because it benefits you. And so that is a real difference there. All right, let's finish these.
Incentives and institutional power.
Exactly. Perhaps most embarrassingly, elected officials promoted the site and invited Hamilton experts to testify. Dianne Feinstein, James Langford, Rich Blumenthal, Adam Schiff, and Mark Warner were among the offenders. All right. So here's some headlines from there, and then we just have, I believe, one more. Yeah. The mix of digital McCarthyism and fraud did great damage to American politics and culture. News outlets that don't disavow these stories or still pay Hamilton vets as analysts shouldn't be trusted. Absolutely. Every subscriber to those outlets to write to editors about the issue should write to the editors about the issues. I think what he meant there. And oops, sorry, what did I do? Sorry, didn't mean to plug my sister's Twitter handle there, Barry Weiss. For more from the Twitter files, follow Barry Weiss, Lee Fong, Michael Schellenberger, the Free Press, and others. Twitter had no input into this story. Searches were conducted by a third party, so material may have been left out. For more of this story, read the detailed news story at racket.news. That's his new Substack. I don't know why these guys keep changing the names of their Substack. Why? I don't understand. You have a following on one name. Why would you tell? Why would we want to change our podcast name every 3 weeks? You know. Special thanks to Orth for putting together the videos.
I want to mention one more thing before we move on from that.
Sure.
One of them either said in a news interview or he said before Congress, what's the name of the guy who ran it? Matt Watts. Matt Watts, former FBI agent who
Clint Watts, I think.
Is now he's now on MSNBC.
Yeah.
He claimed, I think it was him, claimed that they have chatbots now that can pass a Turing test. For those of you who don't know, the Turing test is an AI that can convince a person in conversation that it is a human being. And it is felt that when finally an AI can pass a Turing test, that will be a landmark in the advancement of artificial intelligence. Anyone with any knowledge of that field could have called that out as bullshit. Just one more example of what I'm talking about. You have all of these academics and people working in the field of artificial intelligence, all these people in Silicon Valley who could have called that out. And why didn't they? Probably because a lot of these people have professional interests, they have business interests. The people at Apple, they don't want to get called before Congress, right? So they don't say anything. Anyone with even a passing knowledge, like myself, I only have I'm not a science person. I only have a passing knowledge of this. And I know there is no such thing as a bot that can pass a Turing test. That's how little curiosity the media had, that they were able to make these transparently false claims.
Right.
And nobody followed up.
Please clap.